prolific source of information from the battlefield. He's Ukrainian Front, and that's at front_Ukrainian. Definitely give him a follow. An interesting piece of first-person video. Again, you could probably watch this one because it is not necessarily gruesome, but it's a couple of Russian forces tooling along in their newly supplied Chinese-made Desert Cross vehicle, kind of a assault vehicle like the SEALs used. It's the Chinese kind of knockoff of that. But this shows these guys tooling around, quite happy. They catch a Ukrainian first-person drone on the front bumper. We don't see any blood and guts, but it's interesting that we do see all the Russians jogging home. So this is another one of those issues that moving in daylight across these areas is just not, it is not viable. It isn't smart. It isn't something you're going to get away with. And you can see these guys get it. But the key thing to worry about here with the Chinese help to Ukraine, Chinese help to Russia, is it enables, they are essentially enabling Russian military industrial complex to produce weapons. The North Koreans, on the other hand, are exporting artillery shells in bulk, 122 millimeter artillery shells, which was the standard artillery post-Soviet systems, and a lot of the Russian systems still firing 122 millimeter shells. But something that I have noted with glee, the very vaunted North Korean ballistic missiles that were sent to the Russians. And again, these weapons were not, they didn't send them ballistic missiles and ballistic missile launchers and pat them on the head and say, here you go, Vladimir, have fun playing with this. These weapon systems, these missiles, these transport, erection, and launch vehicles, they came with North Korean troops who became combatants in the Ukrainian war. Nobody translated the manuals for these launchers or missiles into Russian. That didn't happen. Kim sent his troops into combat in Ukraine. Okay, well, they were there, and I'm delighted to say their most recent ballistic missile that they fired landed in a farm field. I think you may have seen the video of it. The crater was immense, 20 meters across, 10 meters deep. It was huge. And that was also facilitated by the very sandy soil that it hit. So if you want to blow a big crater to impress people, you would do it in sandy soil. But two things are good about that. It missed whatever target it was aiming for by dozens of kilometers. And that's the good thing. The bad thing is you can be certain that North Korean missile aimed and fired by North Koreans was targeted on an apartment building in a city in Ukraine. And that, again, is another one of those links in the handcuffs that we have given Ukraine. That is, you have air defense systems. They are mobile. They are designed to operate close to your zero line, but we have not given you enough air defense systems to protect your own troops on the zero line. You've got to pull these systems back to defend your cities because that's what Putin shoots at. And just that nail in the horseshoe that lost the horse, that lost the king. Why isn't Ukraine carrying out more offensive operations? Okay, well, they don't have the air defense systems to cover and dominate sections of the front, and also to string those air defense systems out to cover their ground lines of communication and supply, right? An army is like a electric lawnmower. You want it to mow the lawn, you got to plug it in somewhere, and you got to protect the cord. So all of these interlocking things, all of these equipment, material, ammunition shortfalls that Congress has heaped on Ukraine. I thought there was going to be a winter offensive, or hoped there would be a winter offensive from Ukraine. I didn't think that Congress would turn its back on Ukraine at Thanksgiving. Their back is still turned on Ukraine. So, Nancy, it's frustrating. It's frustrating to watch, really.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And that's a place where, as we remind people daily, call your Congress people. There is a bill that the Senate has passed which gets Ukraine what they critically need, and call your Congress people and get them. And those of you who are in swing districts know which ones they are. But the rest of us need to keep calling too and let them know how strong support for Ukraine is, so that they can get that bill to the floor and get it voted on. Right now, it's being held up by one man, and hopefully that will change soon, but not soon enough, not quickly enough, compared to what Ukraine really needs at this present time, particularly with Russia's push to try and make some headwind before their president becomes president for life again. And I hope that that is a very short life for the sake of Ukraine and for Russia, for that matter.
Yeah, and there are little sparks of hope today in Moscow. And again, Jason J. Smart, give him a follow. One of my colleagues from the Kyiv Post. Good thing about Jason's reporting is he is a native speaker of Russian, lived there as a young man, speaks several Middle European languages, knows the culture very well, has a great eye for disinformation, is a really good, if you're looking for a language capable lens to observe Russian politics and also, discern what are going on in these videos that you might see. Crowds gathered today in Moscow at the cemetery where Putin's latest victim, Alexei Navalny, was buried. The cops locked the gates to the cemetery, but this crowd of very brave, patriotic Russians were throwing their flowers over the heads of the police and into the cemetery. As Jason kind of pointed out in his tweet, the revolution has to start somewhere. And this is not a revolution yet, but these are some pretty brave people. And you just think about everything we so totally take for granted: the freedom of assembly, right? Your freedom of speeches, your freedom of religion, if that matters to you. All these things are guaranteed to you, and none of those are guaranteed to the Russian people. It isn't just that they don't enjoy the freedom of assembly. You've also got the Fourth Amendment, right? Your papers, your computers, your thoughts, your opinions, your personal effects, the information that you have, that's constitutionally protected, right? The Second Amendment is your freedom of speech. The Fourth Amendment is the security of your property, but specifically, your papers and effects. These people never have enjoyed that freedom in their life. How much of it? You didn't get a warrant when the FSB kicks their door in. There are no rules of evidence. The evidence is what the prosecutor says it is. So I look at these people, and I gathered at this cemetery. I absolutely admire them. They gathered there. They had They had no reason to think when they gathered there that they were ever going to get home that night, right? They had nothing to tell them that 400 or 1,000 riot police weren't going to surround them and herd them all onto buses and process them to God knows where. They had no idea that wasn't going to happen. So, you know, Putin is not on the verge of falling out of power. I mean that isn't happening. But you know, when you relax yourself at night and concentrate, you know, in your head, just remember this: Putin saw what happened to Nikolai Ceausescu. He saw what happened to Muammar Gaddafi. He saw what happened to Saddam Hussein. And Putin, as a blood-soaked dictator, he knows he's not going easy into that good night. He knows he isn't. He is ever vigilant. He is politically paranoid. He knows that he started this war and he knows that he's losing it. And, you know, we'll see what happens, Vlad. It's been working so well, hasn't it?
Yeah, and there are chinks in the armor, and it's clear nobody knows when or if any of those will matter or mount up to a hill of beans. But it still is an opportunity for momentum to gather. And I actually listened to a little bit of a video yesterday, a YouTube video from Jonathan Fink, who has been a frequent guest on this space recently. And he was interviewing Russian Denis Zakharov, who, if you don't follow Denis, he is constantly campaigning for funds to Ukraine and really working with the NAFO fellows in particular to point out Ukrainian fundraisers that need attention and action and doing things like that behind scenes. And Zakharov had done some videos that you can find on his X timeline from Navalny's funeral. And in the interview that Jonathan Fink had with Denis, Zakharov said about Navalny that he was always here. And even though I questioned most of his stuff, he was like a little bit of a fucked up relative, pardon the French, because he was always here, and he was always here with hope and humor and with a lot of stuff and ideas. And right now, you can notice that everything he did was a call to action, and that a good, proper goodbye to him is a big FU to Putin. And he never gave up, and he never gave up on us. And, again, Denis will note that the Russian resistance, quote unquote, is very splintered and fragmented and highly ineffective. But that FU to Putin is worth noting and supporting. And I also did note just yesterday, and I can't find the link handy, but remember in 2022, the Nobel Peace Prize was split between 3 human rights advocates and organizations. One was from Belarus, one was from Russia, and one was from Ukraine. The principal of the one from Russia, and I think it is Andrei Sakharov, has been, and bear with me, no, that is probably that is the original founder. The man who is currently principal of it has been in Russian prison awaiting trial. And they had the trial very recently, and he was found guilty of however they word it now, related to saying disparaging comments about the Russian military and denigrating the Russian military. And at his trial, after he was found guilty, he was allowed to speak and quoted a fair amount from Franz Kafka's The Trial, which was a Russian book written in some of the what used to be considered the worst times of Russia, and talked about the totalitarianism and complete, um, lack of any agency that the individuals had. And the person who was on trial in The Trial never actually learned what he had been found guilty of and sentenced to prison for. And the head of Memorial, who was being sentenced, said that's exactly what we're experiencing in Russia right now. And so his not call to action, but call to awareness to the Russian people, it is something that will probably filter through in some of the Russian underground as well. So, not perfect, not counting on them to do anything, but yeah, Chuck, to your point, I think that there are chinks in the armor there, and the more we can help to make those chinks expand, probably the better for Ukraine temporarily. You can't say that anyone who comes after Putin would be any better, but something's got to give at some point in that country.
Yeah, and no dictator lives forever. Uh, and if you're enough of a geezer like me, you've seen some of the sort of monumental dictators of history pass from the surface of the earth, right? Stalin's control of his country was, it was I don't know, unprecedented in the history of mankind. Literally killed tens of millions of his own countrymen. Mao Zedong as well, millions, tens of millions of his own countrymen. Uh, Nikolai Ceausescu, as we've named, Saddam Hussein, Muammar Gaddafi. These people too will pass away, and you're really right, Nancy. There's an interesting article in Foreign Affairs recently, and a publication that I read but don't always agree with. However, if you want to start with some interesting and at least well-informed discourse, you can read their articles for free in most cases. By all means, read them. And I especially encourage you to read them because there are people in the foreign policy apparatus that don't exactly agree with us. And they have their reasons for not agreeing with the importance or the timeliness of reinforcing Ukraine. But it's interesting to understand their reasons. I think that they're very easy to refute in many cases, but there are some people, who want to put forward, that off ramp theory for Putin. We need to give him an off ramp, or what? He wants destroying Ukrainian cities. Yeah,
I lost you there just a little bit, Chuck.
I know it scares you when it goes off. That was an alarm actually that went off on my phone. But he, there, Putin is at the end of his tether, and I don't mean politically, but militarily. 95% of his military is engaged in Ukraine. Right, this was a 72-hour operation. That the troops who were launched on the Kyiv salient brought their parade uniforms with them. Right, 72 hours later, he's lost 400,000 men in 700 odd days of combat. This has not gone well for him. And although I'm the guy predicting Russian advances, I'll give it till July. And they're going to be more incremental, but steady Russian advances. And I think, maybe on bullet points this week, we'll talk about where I think the Russian sort of fighting in the first 6 months of 2024, where I think the new zero lines are going to be. But I am still saying firmly, with complete firmness in my conviction, that Russia cannot win this war, right? They've applied 95% of their military to winning this war. Putin needs this war to be over. He needs this war to be won. And he needs to mobilize maybe about 500,000 more men. The fact that he hasn't done that today, last week, the week before, that tells me he doesn't dare. That's the only reason. Look, he's not doing this for the good of his nation, right? He is the nation. He's likely the richest man in the world. Unlike Bill Gates or Elon Musk, Putin possesses everything in the Russian nation. He can take and does anything he wants whenever he wants it. He calls oligarchs into the little 30-foot conference table and says, you're going to sell your oil company, air quotes, that I gave you, and you're going to give this money, pick a unit. You're going to buy whatever. And you either do it or you leave by the balcony. That's the way it is. So Putin needs this election, and don't take that word at its Oxford definition. He needs that political cover to mobilize more people to throw into this war. If he doesn't see, there's got to be somebody on his military staff, some of his senior generals, some of whom were previously thought to be thoughtful men. Gerasimov, who has disappeared, no one knows where he was. He was writing important military doctrine in the early 2000s that people like I read. His writings on what is called hybrid war, total war, the integration of kinetic military operations with political operations, with information warfare operations, with economic operations, lawfare, these sorts of things. He started this war in 2014, and it looked like that was going to work, right? Military theorists looked back and saw that the little green men, the deniable operations that took Luhansk, Donetsk, Crimea, we were all left to amazement. Is this what the future of war is going to look like? But Putin, being fed the sunshine that his cadre of military buffoons, and that's what I translate from the Russian as to general staff, that they tell him, at least a couple of those clowns in the big hats know that having killed 400,000 troops, they should have been able to take Ukraine. What is 400,000 dead? How do you measure that? That's as many people as the United States lost in World War II. 400,000 dead. That's pretty good, Nancy, for a 700-day military operation. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. How much more can Ukraine? How much more valor do we expect from them? I mean, let's give them the tools. We've asked them to build a house, right? And we've given them a rock for a hammer. I mean, let's do it. And don't ever forget, I mean, the nation that has done that, invaded by the Russians, right? Gog of Gog and Magog, right? The superpower, held off by the absolute valor of the citizens of Ukraine. The Russian Black Sea flotilla defeated by a country that doesn't have a damn navy, but has some pretty smart and some pretty brave men and women.
Yep, they absolutely are, Chuck. There's no denying that. And with that, I am actually going to relieve the co-host seat and relinquish that to David Bailey, who's going to be coming up for the next few hours. So he'll be continuing this conversation. And unfortunately, I have some chores to do. So I'm going to have to give up the microphone and be quiet for a little bit as well. But thank you so much, Chuck. And thank you, everyone, for listening. And now will be a perfect time, Chuck, if you're able to do another plug for our fundraiser and those drones. And then David will be up to ask you some more grilling questions.
Nancy. Thank you. This is one of the few times we've gotten to work together, and I really appreciate it. Thank you for spending your Sunday with me and get those chores done. I've pushed my chores back, and I'm happy to have done so. And David, looking forward to talking to you as well.
Sure, thanks very much, Mike.
Absolutely, man. Complete pleasure. And hey, so remember, if you're listening, it's so easy to help us. We are looking to get more thermal enabled first person drones into the hands of our Ukrainian friends. And, the average cost of one of those things, a couple of grand, give or take, depends on where you get them, where the cameras are, their capabilities, etc. These are so important, and they are used both as life-saving tools. You can help you find survivors with these things. They are also used in a defensive capability for our Ukrainian friends. Anything you can kick in. We don't want the rent. We don't want the cable money. We don't even want your lunch money. But whatever you can do, we're so happy to have it. Look, we're a 501c3. Our finances are absolutely transparent. We have the IRS breathing down our neck. And the good thing about that is your deduction, if you're an American and a Canadian now, I understand it's tax deductible. So you don't want to give it to Uncle Sam or the big maple leaf. You can give it to us and we'll get it into the right place. David, thank you, bud. I'm glad to be on with you. Hope you're doing good.
Yeah, I'm very well, thanks, Chuck. It's great to be on with you. It's the first time I think we've done a session together. So looking forward to this. I haven't really been listening in today. I've been busy doing other things. So I don't know if maybe you can just give me a rundown of where we are and what we're talking about. That would be really helpful. I've got a general question for you about where we are, where we find ourselves now in the war, and what you think the timeline is. And I know that's a very, very difficult question, but I think we were talking about this probably before the counteroffensive in the summer, so springtime last year, and I think you were saying then that there would be more than likely that we'd be looking at a 4-year overall time frame for the war. And I thought that was a bit much at the time, but it seems like that's at least correct.
Yeah, that's something. Boy, unfortunately, I still think 4 years, and that is a year later. So I've pushed my own number back a little bit. I hate to say that. No one will be happier to eat crow than me. I will take out an ad in the New York Times saying I was a stooge and I was wrong. Unfortunately, though, one of the variables in my calculus was wavering support from the United States. And I didn't foresee anything like this. The months-long delays. I mean, I saw foot dragging. I saw partisan politics. I saw reluctance to deliver long-range precision strike munitions like the ATACMS. But boy, I didn't see this, David. It was
No, I don't think anyone did. I mean, I certainly didn't do, and I was in a DGAP, which is like the German, kind of one of the German think tanks to do with foreign relations, and Benjamin Tallis was in there, and Catherine Belton, who wrote a book about Putin's men. And she was convinced that there was going to be an issue with shells in the spring of this year. And at the time, so this was about October last year. At the time, I was very skeptical about this being possible because, I know a little bit about how Russian industry works, and I know a little bit also about how Western industry works. And there really is no need for this, the capacity that we have in the West. And, this has been something that's been underlined by people like David Cameron, for example. It's so far in advance of what Russia has in terms of resources, and we're seeing them having to go to North Korea to get shells, and yet we're incapable of supplying what they need now. And so, yeah, as I say, Catherine Belton was saying that we would be in a shell shortage in the spring, and I was very skeptical in October, but here we are.
wow. I enjoyed her book very much, actually, Putin's Men. Enjoyed that very much. Wow. And she's really looked forward, in a very discerning manner. But there's one thing we were just talking about, and I'm sure that everyone can count on here. As around last Thanksgiving, so the middle of November of this past year, there were those rumbles in Congress, both American Congress, both sides dug in, beating their shields and managing to threaten and reassure their partisans that they weren't going to budge. And I took that very seriously. I realized it was going to be a long fight. I realized that this was no longer about supplying Ukraine, but about unrelated issues in American domestic politics. But David, I was really wrong to think that some of the men and women we sent to Congress would actually put the good of the nation ahead of partisan politics. I never thought they would do what they've done now. And I like to still think, to our American listeners, look, don't let these guys get away with it. Don't forget what they've done to Ukraine. Don't forget it. Let them know. And the bad thing, David, as she said, looking forward, the shell shortage in the spring. Well, that's coming. Spring is on us, and there was no Ukrainian offensive during the coldest months of the winter when there could have been. There was none. And in fact, as winter started to fade here, we have seen quite the opposite. Ukraine is now shortening its defensive lines. That means retreating. And I'm afraid I got to say this too, David. I don't see I certainly don't see an early summer offensive for Ukraine. I don't. I see these lines contracting, Ukraine going backwards, and unfortunately, I throw a dart at my calendar and I see mid-July before I think shells, ammunition, equipment, weapon systems are going to arrive in supply sufficient to let Ukraine, serve and center receive, and that's alarming.
Yeah, that's very, very sobering, and because it's completely unnecessary. I think that's the main thing that sticks in your throat when we're discussing it. I've got a question based on the shell. So as far as I recall, we need about 8,000 shells a day. Is that correct? Is that kind of the optimum or the roughly the right number?
Yeah, that's a rough number. You know, but that's about 7,000 more shells than they're firing today. Not quite, but and even that is kind of a minimum. But yeah, let's take that as a working number. Absolutely.
So that would mean like 3 million a year, right? Something like that. 2 points.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Russians are, they've got, in terms of, the term of art is volume of fire, right? In terms of the number of shells that are in the air, that the Russians put in the air, and in relation to the shells that the Ukrainians have put into the air, that at any given place on the battlefield is generally somewhere between 10 and 100 to 1 in favor of the Russians. So part of that is an artifact of the manner in which Russians employ artillery, which is almost sort of spray and pray, but it shows how short of resources the Ukrainians are.
Yeah, so this is something that I think is, pretty key to kind of understanding the Russians' willingness to, well, lose people and lose also aeroplanes, as it turns out. They really don't take into account that there is any limit on the number of people that you could kill or the number of planes you could use, because I think it comes from basically having an economy which is based on digging stuff out of the ground and selling it. There basically isn't a limit to that. And, Russians are kind of famous for very, very short-term thinking, in that, live for today kind of thinking. And so I think that's just something we see all the way through their MO, if you like. So we see that in the information space. Go on.
David, I was interested. You were delving into German politics related to the war. I would love to hear your take on that, if you feel and Olaf Schulz, and what might exactly be going on in that poor man's mind. But that would be very interesting to me to hear.
Yeah, sure. Where to start with that? I mean, I think that at the moment, we in a strange sort of way, we've got kind of a similar situation in the US as we've got in Germany, in that, one man is making a huge difference to the way that the state is behaving. If you look at all of the opinion polls and also the statements that come out from other people within the government, including Boris Pistorius, the defense minister, they're very, very much more in support of Ukraine than the states behaving, right? So Olaf Schulz is putting the brakes on in a way which is just frankly bizarre. If you were thinking of him as a representative of the German state, he's behaving in a very strange way. Now, I guess your question is, why is that the case? Why is he behaving like he is? And I can't tell you that, but I can give you my kind of analysis. The SPD is basically a kind of an unreformed socialist party, and it went through a period much like the British Labour Party in the 90s, where Gerhard Schroeder was the head, where it became kind of a little bit more market oriented. So there's still this kind of rump, let's say, socialist wing, of which Schulz is certainly a part. So it's not really clear whether he's behaving the way he is because he's genuinely compromised in some way, or just whether he's behaving the way he is because he comes from this kind of school of thinking of, Germany and Russia need to get on in order for things to be okay, because that's kind of the received wisdom in that part of the SPD. the Social Democratic Party of Germany. So I don't know if that helps, but maybe we can sort of.
No, that helps a lot. And I love Axel dearly, but we are about 10 time zones apart, and I don't get to work with him a lot. But I am aware that in Axel's estimation, Mr. Schulz is let's see, he seemed to have a very red past, and am I right to remember in his younger days his politics were decidedly, let's just say, pro-Soviet on an ideological basis?
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly anti-American, pro-Soviet, I think as well. I mean, he's travelled to the occupied zone quite frequently during the 60s and 70s, and also to Moscow. So, as I say, there's no proof of any concrete compromat or something like that, but it's not beyond the realms of possibility. But it's more likely that he's just kind of been indoctrinated for such a long time in this school, and there is this kind of unreformed Marxist elements within the SPD, of which he's kind of part. I mean, although they've kind of on the face of things, disavowed any kind of association with Marxism, there's still a lot of baggage there, which kind of just comes with the territory almost.
Yeah, and that's, David, it's fascinating me to talk to you about this, because I'm more on the kinetic spectrum here, and it's the European politics are always so very interesting to me.
I mean, you have the same thing in the Labour Party. I mean, you don't have this in the United States, I have to say. I mean, you've got the furthest left you've got there is Bernie Saunders, but within European politics, you still have this kind of, there's kind of this socialist wing of basically any party on the left, where they kind of outwardly disassociate themselves from Marxism, but still have this kind of idea that capitalism is somehow evil, and that's, there needs to be something else that kind of takes up the slack, if you like. I mean, and that's still very, very much present, I think.
And I don't have a problem with socialism, right? I mean, all of our adversaries, all of our allies are socialist. I once wrote a position paper about, and again, no one asked me. I mean, I was in political warfare school at the time. I wrote a position paper saying that the United States should intervene in El Salvador immediately on the side of the guerrillas, right? That they were fighting for something that was good and right and was fair. That goes to show the amount of freedom of expression we had in the special operations community. I got an A on the paper, but I didn't change anyone's thought. The only problem I have ever had with Marxism is that its demand that the only legitimate means of changing a government is violence. And I'm old enough to have had to become conversant in dialectical materialism, because that, the Soviet monolith, Marxist proxies around the world were the perennial foe, which is what the Russians still refer to the Americans as, the perennial foe. So, understanding what your enemy believes, or your adversary, I don't even like to use the word enemy anymore, but you have to understand what they believe in, heart and soul, what they are willing to put their lives on the line for. And, of course, a great part of that the Marxists kind of, and by this I mean the Soviets, were happy to inflect this anti-imperialism at least as a couple of words, and no one was supposed to look at the Russian Empire, which surrounded Berlin, as and Eastern Europe, and subjugated them. But it's so interesting, David, to get get your assessment of European politics. And what do the German people, if not their leaders, what do they think about this Russian intervention? Are they,
So there
are
I mean, two points. So first of all, on the question you asked, so the German public is, I would say, 70% probably in favour of more arms to Ukraine, and totally against. So even more than that, I would say, recognise that Russia's the aggressor here, and that Russia needs to withdraw to the 1991 borders. There are some conversations I've had with, let's say, industrial fellows, so people at the big kind of engineering companies in Germany, where they're kind of more conciliatory. So there's definitely an industry lobby which would, very much kind of like to get back to this status quo ante, and that's not going to happen. But that's very small minorities. I mean, if you look at the CDU, the Christian Democratic Union, and the CSU, so the kind of twin parties on the centre right, they're thoroughly in support of Ukraine. And we've had Roderick Kiesewetter, one of the vocal advocates of Ukraine in the German Bundestag, on the space. So there's a very lively, let's say, pro-Ukrainian thread in German domestic politics, but also within the general public. So if you look at the main newspapers, from Die Zeit, which is a very, very highbrow kind of Sunday paper, weekly newspaper, to Der Spiegel or Das Bild, which is kind of a red top newspaper, all extremely pro-Ukraine and anti-Russian. So, I mean, in terms of public opinion, and also the political landscape, there's basically nothing really to worry about. Having said that, there are parties on the left and the right, and that makes up kind of 20% of the vote, according to opinion polls, which is a concern, because both of those parties are, or actually there's more than two parties, but basically the left and the right, the Alternative for Germany, AfD, and then there are two parties on the left, Die Linke, which is basically the former Communist Party of East Germany, which has gone through a couple of reincarnations, and also there's another one that's just emerged called Sarah Wagenknecht, who's let's say a special person. She's an extreme left-wing politician, appears on Sunday evening television programs all the time. As I say, this kind of end of the horseshoe grouping does make up around about 10% of the votes, but the motivations for those people who would support those parties are really nothing to do with Russia on the whole. It's really much more of a domestic consideration, and the Russian baggage comes with just the fact that those parties have been financed by the Kremlin, and the people at the heads of those parties are compromised by the Kremlin, typically. So yeah, that's unfortunate, and it's kind of tricky, but it doesn't really reflect of the mood of the population. If you see what I mean, does that make sense? I don't. Probably doesn't.
No, it makes perfect sense. And here's a little something that was interesting to me. Sort of Austria, which has, I think if you stop the average American, I hate to say this, they probably couldn't tell you where it is. If someone could tell you where it is, they would say, well, it's an allied nation. And if you stopped someone like you and I, we might know that Austria has had a very complex relationship with the rest of NATO. I can tell you in my old line of work, if you wanted to defect or have dealings with the Russians or meet your Russian Soviet handler, you did so in Vienna. And it was interesting to me because I just read this this morning that the former Austrian foreign minister, Ms. Kniesi, has announced her final move to Russia, saying, I moved to Russia because it is a truly free country. And I'm sure, David, that didn't have anything to do with her previous compromise or cooperation or intimate working relations with the Russian FSB or KGB. What did you make of that little news nugget today?
Well, I mean, I didn't hear that actually, but we talk about in the space quite often that Vienna's just a kind of a spy hub from the communist days, and that legacy survived unfortunately in Austrian politics. So basically, all through the political parties are all compromised to one degree or another. One of the biggest financial institutions in Austria, Raiffeisen Bank, is still doing business in Russia. Yeah, the list goes on and on. So Russia's really highly compromised, generally speaking. Kniesel's just one example of that. She's well known for being. I think she invited Putin, or she did invite Putin to her wedding, for example, and danced with him at the wedding. So the links go back a long way, and they're deep. And yeah, I don't really know what else I can say about that. The Prime Minister Nehammer is also also deeply compromised. So yeah, Austria is what it is. It's a bit like Switzerland. I mean, it's a neutral country, so it's not part of NATO. Yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah, and I am a Swiss myself, or my family is Swiss, and I have been more than a little embarrassed sometimes about, understanding Swiss neutrality, but Switzerland manufactured ammunition, for example, for the Gepard air defense system, and it wouldn't allow that ammunition to even be transferred so that ammunition could go to Gepards that are serving in Ukraine. And I just...
Yeah, that was ridiculous, but I mean, I think they found a way around it in the end, right?
They did, but it was, that was the thing I could get angry about, a year ago, and now I have to get even more angry at my own country. And believe me, I mean, David, I'm not letting them off the hook. This has been it's a foreign policy blunder of the first magnitude. My disappointment goes not just to Congress, but to the executive as well. And I do everything I can whenever I'm on here. I mean, I do triple backflips to avoid American politics, and I mean by naming parties. But the leadership, it never, of both congressionals, people in Congress, chairmen, chairwomen, senators, representatives, and members of the executive branch, cabinet members, I have never failed to be unimpressed by their leadership, by their foresight.
Well, look, I think that it's America's got a big job to do, and I mean a big job in the sense that it's really it's quite it's quite difficult, right? I mean, basically, the United States is kind of a global empire that's never really existed as a global empire in the way that the United States has effectively been kind of playing that role and not really recognizing itself as being an imperial power. And calling it an imperial power is wrong, because under the United States' military umbrella, countries are allowed to have agency and do basically what they like. So America is something that hasn't existed in the world before the end of the Second World War. It's a new animal, and it's kind of still finding its way. I mean, looking at it from a historical perspective. So, I don't think we should underestimate the challenge that the United States has. The people in the United States, might think that their country stands up for freedom, and you can argue that the political landscape at the moment isn't allowing them to do that. But equally, do you see what I mean? What I'm getting at is that.
Oh no, absolutely. And you spoke of the horseshoe, and that is the political spectrum where it bends. And you get people on the extreme right and the extreme left, and their positions, if not their motivations, seem to overlap. I mean, I'm proud to tell everybody I'm this sort of libertarian ex-hippie with a California university education. My own libertarian views don't have, I have a friend who used to call me a hawkish liberal. I only do that because the world is a playground, and like every playground, there are bullies, and you have to stand up to them. And it is always easier to do something before that bully gets more and more and more powerful. All you really have to do is prove to them you're not a victim, right, David? That's all. That's all we need.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that there needs to be some kind of formalized broadening of NATO eventually. I guess this is all in question now, because we don't know what's going to happen with the United States government. But I think the Western alliance, if you like, has gone through, made some mistakes, some pretty big mistakes in the past. So with regard to Libya and Iraq, and Afghanistan, and pulling out of Afghanistan, and pulling out of Iraq in the way that, and Syria in the way that we've done, has just done endless damage to the alliance. But at some point we have to be able to secure the seaways. We have to secure the freedom of navigation. We have to do the same for lots of other aspects. And I don't really see a way of doing that without a much broader and deeper kind of military alliance moving forward. But yeah, maybe that's a bit too far off. We've got some hands, so maybe Lexicon first, and then Ben.
That sounds great.
Oh, hallelujah! I have to do contortions to ease my thumb onto the mic while not hitting the superimposed bloody someone. But anyway, thanks a lot, guys. I wanted to ask you both, Chuck and David. You were talking about Germany and about the Taurus leaks. Which a lot of our friends, Benjamin Tallis and so on, are treating as really serious security breaches, you think. But my question is, I don't exactly, aside from it being embarrassing, which it is in spades, but why the Russians did this, because we know they're scared witless of the Taurus. But this kind of thing, to me, what the content of the leak, and I've listened to the recording, helpfully translated by somebody, some good soul on Twitter, and what they do is completely disassemble every excuse that Schulz has made. All Schulzing has been ripped to shreds. They could supply it. They know what you could do with it and how you do it. And there'd be no need for any German to be there. And the Ukrainians could use it in 2 weeks. And if they want to totally destroy the bridge, well, they might spend 4 months working on that if they want at the outside. So leaking that, in the sense that it does dismantle all of Schulz's excuses, his pretends that Germany would have to have boots on the ground, and that was his red line and all that jazz, and the Ukrainians couldn't do it, this, that, and the other thing, then it seems to me it's kind of like, good shot, sir, Putin shooting himself in the foot, because it seems to me that all the embarrassment considered, it makes it more likely that Schulz is going to have to, in the end, or Schulz or somebody else. I've been tweeting Schulz oder Taurus. What do you prefer? It makes it more likely that Taurus will go to Ukraine. I wondered how you guys analyze it. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, I think if I jump in there, Chuck, quickly, what I'd say here is this is the kind of law of unintended consequences, right? So we were talking a bit earlier about, the Russian MO is volume over quality, and I think that they think that they've done something here which is going to undermine the Western position, whereas in fact what they've done is basically shot themselves in the foot. And I think that kind of thing happens over and over again, but most of the time we just don't notice it because it kind of gets lost in the noise. In this case, as you say, this basically disassembles any reason why we would hesitate to send Taurus. But I think what they're thinking is that this would play into the hands of people who would say this is going to escalate towards nuclear war. So I think they're basically overestimating the degree to which Western populations are scared of a nuclear war with Russia. Although obviously that is a concern that we hear from certain people. I think the general feeling in the population, at least in Europe, is that, and probably in the US as well, I don't know, is that Russia's cried wolf a few too many times for that to be a serious consideration. And we've delivered weapon system after weapon system and crossed the red lines over and over again, and nothing's happened. So therefore, there's something else going on, right? So the threat of nuclear war is something which I think has lost credibility in most circles, and I think that's something that the Russians haven't really realized yet.
Yeah, they're happy to bang that trash can, threatening nuclear warfare. But and again, I don't want to amplify that messaging at all, but I'd just like to recast it a little bit. So when you hear a bald guy with a puffy face staring into the microphone and threatening you with nuclear annihilation, what he's really saying is, I'm going to destroy my entire country. I am going to drag my nation into the last war in its history, and I'm going to end its history. Let's put it that way. I'm not just facing the United States. I'm facing the other independent nuclear powers, Great Britain, France. And it just isn't going to happen, David. It's, but he's happy to say that. And like you said, he's called wolf, and it doesn't scare anybody.
It's worked, but it's worked quite well up to this point. I think, up until I'd say probably it's been about a year in my mind that the idea that Russia's suddenly going to fire nuclear weapons has suddenly become, well, not suddenly, but has gradually become less and less likely. And let's say the received wisdom is that this is complete nonsense now. I think at the beginning of the invasion, this was still very much something on the lips of let's say the media and so on, and it still is. It still comes back every now and then, but I think with every wave it's less and less.
You know, I don't see it. To think that he has to say that, right? I'm threatening nuclear war. You're threatening the destruction of your own country. You're already doing it. You've lost as many people in 2 years. You've lost as many people as the United States lost fighting a global war, the biggest war that ever was. The United States lost 400,000 people. You've lost them in 2 years, and you have not subdued a neighboring power. Right? The United States was fighting across the Atlantic and the Pacific on 2 continents, Pacific Islands, on and on. Russia they're not going to win this war. They are embarked on, look, this just isn't going to work out for them. And eventually, the dominoes are going to fall. The Kerch Bridge is going to be severed. It's going to stay severed. Russia's ability to project combat power will continue to diminish at a greater and greater rate. And eventually, history shows us the foot soldiers of an army that will eventually realizes they're being led to destruction will invariably turn on their commanders. And we know that from the Peloponnesian War straight through Iran's Republican Guard. We've seen that throughout history. It's an immutable fact, and Russia's staring it in the face, David, in my opinion.
No, I totally agree with you. I think there are a couple of points I've got on that, but Ben's had his hand up for a while, so let's go to Ben.
Well, thanks, David. Hi, Chuck. I want to agree with you, which is not really talked about too much, that the problems of supply from the United States is not just the latest from the House of Representatives and the Republican Party, but it goes to the White House too. And I guess one of the things, and I think that one of the issues has to do with the information domain, which is, and then I'll get back to the strategy, which is that I don't think that Ukraine has sufficiently defined its terms for victory. It said we want victory, but will it continue until Crimea is taken, or will it stop short of that? Of course, Zelensky has said that, or he's intimated that Crimea is Ukraine. He said it explicitly. But I think in the United States, I think in the White House, they think maybe that's just a negotiating position, and that by limiting the supply of weapons, that eventually Ukraine will be hurt enough to call an end to the war on a negotiated basis with Russia. And they just haven't been resolute enough in their messaging. The Ukraine government has been, as Israel is, in what its terms for ending the war in Gaza is, which is the destruction of Hamas, which is really pretty much pissed off the White House. And now they're trying to go around Netanyahu. But I think that that's a problem on the Ukrainian side, is that victory has not been defined in a way that it's really clear that it's resolute, that the limiting the supply of weapons isn't going to change the calculus of continuing. And I can say this now, but I couldn't say it then, because I've been saying this for a while, and not everybody's been receptive to it. But when I was in Bakhmut the Christmas ago, at that time they were short of ammunition, and I couldn't say it back then. I probably couldn't say it until now. And so it was pretty clear, with what I knew, which was the weapons the modern weapons or the Western weapons weren't getting to the brigades fighting there, except for a couple of HIMARS, basically, and the drones that they were homegrown, and there was a shortage then, and that was over a year ago, and it was like that was something that just people weren't supposed to know. And so I think that our White House, this is long before the current problem of supply goes. They were obviously clear that there was a shortage back then, but they waited too. So I just want to lay that out, and I think that I hope that Zelensky and the government make it very, very clear that no matter what, and I think they do it with signaling. Like Zelensky's recently last week, he said that they have two plans. One is if the U.S. supplies more weapons. The other is if they don't. And and I think that and it's even a stronger message that if they don't, that no matter what, Ukraine will continue until victory is on the terms it wants. So I just wanted to mention all that. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's that's kind of a fair point, except that I would say that I don't think Ukraine is particularly been hiding the fact that it wants its return to its borders, and I think even Biden's said that the end is to the 1991 borders, and it might well be that in the White House itself or in the NSA, there's this idea that maybe they'll give up Crimea and maybe there can be a settlement based on that fact. But the big problem I have with this is that the most sensible way to win the war as quickly as possible is to take Crimea and split the occupied territory in two, and that leaves Russia with very big problems, and that's just seems to me to be the quickest strategic way to do it. And I would expect that people in the White House understand that as well as anyone else.
Well, I'd like to say that it's one thing to say it, it's another thing for people to believe it. And I think that and I don't think everyone necessarily in the United States government believed it, because it was, well, that's what he's saying now, but when it gets bad enough, he'll change his position. And I think that has been the calculus for all of this time, and saying anything in politics means nothing at all if you're not going to live by it. And that's politics is all about saying stuff and then getting the other guy to do something different. And I think that's been my opinion is that's been a problem.
I think we all agree with you.
Yeah, I remain a bit of a territorial absolutist. But again, I'm not spilling my blood. I have an opinion as an observer 4,000 miles away. But, Ukraine did not start this war. They did not ask for it. They had no territorial demands to make of Russia. And from a military geopolitical standpoint, as long as Crimea is in the hands of a hostile foreign power, Ukraine's future and its ability to trade freely with other nations is in jeopardy. So, and there's no question that Russia is a hostile foreign power. So
yeah, I mean, I can't really see security on the eastern flank of NATO with Russia still in Crimea. I mean, I just don't think that works.
Exactly. And given that the Black Sea, as odd as it looks, it's international waters. During the Cold War, and even I thought this was a bit of a provocation, but the United States made certain that periodically it sent warships into the Black Sea just to show the Russians that these were, by every lawful definition, international waters, and that all nations enjoyed the freedom of navigation. and that has always been the United States Navy's, I don't know, that is its number one mission, is to ensure peaceful freedom of navigation for all nations through every ocean in the world. So
Yeah, I
that
mean, then
includes
that's
giving
that.
you.
David, do you mind if I just add one more thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. And I just one more factor which we often mention, but I think is relevant here. There are a lot of people in contact with a lot of people in Ukraine, but I'm in contact with people in Ukraine every single day, pretty much all day long, all up and down the spectrum, because of what I do. And I can tell you that almost to a man, and a woman, they know it's a genocidal war and they're not giving up. So Crimea is essential to their cause, both from a territorial standpoint, but also they see that the defeat of the aggressor is necessary, and without that total defeat and victory, that they are going to be in genocidal peril, just as they have been from 2014 or even before that, and that they just don't want to continue this anymore. And so the Ukrainian people themselves, and everybody I deal with, and then I say, well, what about other people and so forth? They know what this is about, and they're not giving up. And I don't think their voice has been heard well enough. It's one of the things I do, is try to elevate their voice, the voice of the people, to be part of the understanding of where this country is going. So thanks a lot, David, for giving me the floor again. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's fun. It's all good stuff. What I would say is that the support for Ukraine. I mean, I think what you're saying there is basically the Ukrainian nation isn't going to put up with having Russia on Crimea. But I think here, the rest of the world's interests align perfectly well with Ukraine's interests, because as I said just before, a situation on NATO's eastern flank with Russia still in control of Crimea doesn't work. It doesn't work for the security of NATO's eastern flank. And I think if you look at the political dynamics within NATO, it's very much being led by the countries that know Russia best at the moment. And we've seen Macron come out in the last week, basically parroting Kaya Kallas, to some extent. And that's the way it's moving. And the point is that the freedom of navigation is universal, a universal good for the entire planet. And if we give it up in the Black Sea, it means that we also give it up in the Straits of Hormuz and the Red Sea, and we also give it up in the Malacca Straits. And if we do that, then we're basically it's game over, and we're into a very long global conflagration with I think outcomes that none of us would like to even consider. So I don't really see a way out of this for the United States or the Western alliance more generally, where we can sacrifice Crimea to Russia. I don't see how that works at all. Lexicon.
Wow. Yeah, well, I agree with you, but Ben, I really appreciate. I mean, you're the person who's articulated on the space several weeks ago that clearly U.S. does not agree that Ukraine should take Crimea. because there's no other way to analyze this, no other theory that explains why U.S. refuses, for example, to give the right long-range unitary head ATACMS, to give armaments like main battle tanks in meaningful numbers, Bradleys in meaningful numbers. And I think that, I mean, since you've articulated that, I've repeated it with credits to you when I was able to on the space. And I agree. I don't think there's any fault in Ukraine's messaging because, frankly, with the kind of allies that Ukraine has to deal with, it's just as well to speak softly and carry a big stick. I think Ukraine has to get whatever armaments it can. If it gets long-range ATACMS or Taurus or whatever mix of whatever long-range precision missiles, all to the good. If it doesn't, it's going to do it the ways that it can. But I think for Ukraine, it would be folly to leave, precisely because of American positions, absolutely folly to leave Ukraine to the end. And in any case, doesn't make strategic sense in this war. We've known, Chuck and General Ben Hodges have schooled us in this since 2022. And like mid-year, we've known that, as the rest of the world has come to see, that driving to the Sea of Azov is what Ukraine has to do. And Ukraine is looking for every means to destroy, for example, to destroy minefields, because the drive to the Sea of Azov is not just an operational, but a strategic move that's essential for Ukraine. We know, and General Hodges repeats constantly, Ukraine is not viable with a Russian malevolent presence on Crimea, which is its unsinkable aircraft carrier in the Black Sea, its malevolent presence in the Black Sea, and that's got to be gone. Crimea's been there as, I mean, in partnership with all the many peoples across the Pontic steppe for ages, assuring the people who became the Ukrainian people their trade and communication exchange with the peoples of the Mediterranean and the whole world. And that's Ukraine, yeah, as Hodges says, Ukraine is not viable without it. And the war is won much more rapidly. I mean, once Crimea becomes untenable, I mean, Donbass is this rump, useless flank. Donbass is going to melt away. And in any case, not a strategic, crippling situation for Ukraine, however long that takes. But and so I think Ukraine will collect the munitions that it can, the armaments that it can, and will go for that jugular, if as and when it becomes able. I don't think there's any need to verbally challenge the White House on this issue. I think that Ukraine, it's the just do it. And that's what they do. They just do it. And yeah, but I really appreciate, Ben, that you articulated this. It's really quite a few weeks ago. I think that you kind of made the unspoken spoken. And I appreciated it a lot. And yeah, I would put it forward if I had an opportunity to this administration in the US. But I think you're dead on. And I think Ukraine knows that. They know their economy as well as their history very well. And they will do it. I think they will deal with it. Over.
David, I'm gonna have to get off here now. I'm also gonna make way for Peter. It was great speaking with you. It was really great to work with some people I don't get to work with very often. Always, I have never been on the show where I didn't learn something. And I want to thank everyone who's listening, everyone who puts up with working with me. And the last thing I'll say as I'm going out the door, listen, we are raising funds, and we have a specific purpose. We're going to get some DJI Mavic 3 thermal drones, and we're going to get them for the 13th Battalion of the 95th Air Assault Brigade. These things are much, much needed by the brave men and women who are in that unit. And if you can, like I said, we don't want the lunch money, the utility money, the mortgage payment, the property tax. We don't want any of that. But you know what? Anything you can do will help us get some of these into the hands of the good guys. But David, thank you so much. It's great working with you. And Peter, welcome aboard. I'll be dropping off. You can grab that big co-host from me. And I didn't even break the space, David. It's amazing.
Normally happens when I come up. Thanks a lot, Chuck.
Okay. Thanks, you guys. I'll see you all on Tuesday night, if not sooner. But thanks, everybody. Good night to everybody in Europe, and good afternoon in North America.
Thanks very much. So, lexicon. What was I going to say? Yeah, you were saying about the. I had a point. Now I've completely gone out of my mind. Now I'm starting to speak.
I was saying that Ben had really spoken. That, I mean, his thesis is that this White House really does not embrace the idea of Ukraine taking Crimea, and that Ukraine is going to go ahead and do it. But that Ben's thesis that he articulated weeks ago, I think it's right, and it's correct, and that's the only perspective that explains the administration's hesitance to give, the big stuff, the right stuff that Ukraine needs. But I think that Ukraine will keep mum if necessary, be appreciative of everything it gets, and will go ahead and take Crimea. And it's going to take it first. I mean, ASAP, because that's the way to open up everything else. Is that you jog your memory?
So, yes, exactly. So I think this is completely valid as a kind of, let's say, a position, let's say, within the NSA and probably within Biden himself to some extent. But where I have a slight problem with it is that these people aren't as powerful as they think they are. And whilst this might be the kind of thinking in the White House, what's going along in parallel is, the G7 guarantees, the prospect of Ukraine coming into NATO, the prospect of Ukraine coming into the European Union, and all of this creates a legal and let's say a market framework which also enables Ukraine to raise money from private investors. And I think this is part of the picture which kind of goes under the radar a lot. It's something that's not going to happen overnight, but I think if we're in any doubt that Ukraine is going to be a leading arms manufacturer in 5 years' time, then we're kidding ourselves. Ukraine is going to have a massive advanced arms industry, and the money is going into Ukraine as we speak to make that happen. And so, irrespective of what the White House wants or doesn't want, Ukraine will be in a position to defend its borders, whatever happens. The shell starvation that we've got at present is going to cost more lives than necessary. But I think the direction of travel is already set, and set in a way which is to the benefit of Ukraine in the end. It's just going to take longer and cost more lives, unfortunately. Welcome up, Peter.
Hello, David. How are you doing?
Not bad. Am I disturbing you? How are you?
You're not disturbing me, but I was just eating some porridge.
I was going to say, you sound like you're eating something. Get on with your
No,
porridge.
apologies for that. I will take a small break. Yeah, I've been listening to you and Chuck. Chuck's always good as usual, as always. Yeah, fascinating discussion. The porridge can wait. Don't worry about that. Yes, I'm with you for the next hour or so, I think, and then I have I think James Healy up until midnight, and then I'm only here 2 hours, so we'll see what happens in the meantime. I haven't heard that any more planes have been down today, but we had I think one Su-24 down yesterday, so that was something like 14 in 14 days or 13 in 14 days, something like that. What else, David?
Yeah. Well, I was going to make a few more points on what we were just talking about. So, I think one thing that's interesting is that the way Russia kind of projects onto our behaviour. So it was going back to this thing about the Bundeswehr conversation on a WebEx, which seems to have been monitored by the Russians, and this seems to have been the case. And one thing about this is that first of all, that they shouldn't have been talking about sensitive things on a WebEx. I mean, whether there should have been on a WebEx at all is another issue, but certainly the topic of conversation was inappropriate given that fact. But I think one part of this is that
What's a WebEx?
Well,
I'm not up with this. Obviously something.
Oh, it's like a Skype. It's a web conferencing platform. It's a commercial web conferencing platform, and you know the story, right? So I mean, the thing is that the Bundeswehr were talking about how Taurus could be used to take out the bridge, and that there was nothing really to stop them. There's no reason to not deliver. I mean, they could do this, and Ukraine would be perfectly capable of doing the targeting and so forth. And so the leak from Russia seems to have shot them in the foot, because the Bundeswehr were discussing basically all of the mechanisms that Schulz said was impossible. They detailed. So kind of all of Schulz's excuses were basically demonstrated to be false during this call, and Russia leaked it. And we were talking about, what benefit did that have for Russia? I think, and I was saying that Russia thinks that they got a win there because the threat of nuclear war is something that they bring up over and over again, and they haven't really quite worked out that the threat of nuclear war